Good morning, you're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Here are your top stories. Munich airport reopens after drone sightings forced a temporary shutdown, disrupting dozens of flights and affecting thousands of passengers. Global protests erupted after Israel intercepted a Gaza-bound aid flotilla, sparking clashes and arrests. The US President Donald Trump warns of possible federal job and project cuts if the shutdown continues. Munich airport has reopened after a drone sighting near its airspace forced a temporary shutdown and grounded multiple flights on Thursday night. At least 17 flights were cancelled, affecting nearly 3,000 passengers, while another 15 were diverted to nearby cities including Stuttgart, Vienna and Frankfurt. The airport closed 2 hours ahead of its usual overnight curfew as a safety precaution. Federal police said the drones were seen twice after dark, but due to poor visibility, details about their size or origin remains unknown. Several European airports have faced similar disruptions in recent weeks, with authorities still investigating the source of the drones. Looking to European defence, leaders have gathered in Copenhagen for the European Political Community Summit to discuss security, energy and the future of cooperation on the continent. Our Andy Mioch has more from the venue.
The sessions of the European Political Community Summit here in Copenhagen have wrapped up, at least according to the official schedule. The plenary saw a lot of talk on the war in Ukraine. The host, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, said Russia will not stop until it is forced to do so and called for more weapons and ammunition deliveries to Kyiv. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke on the recent drone incidents across Europe, saying that signals that Russia feels bold enough to escalate the war. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who had to leave early because of the attack at a synagogue in Manchester, called for further sanctions on Russia's energy and its so-called shadow fleet.
Peace with Russia can only be achieved through strength. We have to strengthen Ukraine and weaken Russia with more sanctions. We have to be able to finance the armed forces in Ukraine. All of us have to deliver more weapons, more ammunition, and we have to do it faster. Nowhere it will make a greater impact for European security than at the front lines in Ukraine.
We've seen in recent weeks the appetite that Putin has to not only rain down on Ukraine, but also to take action and to interfere right across Europe in many different ways, whether that's in relation to our airspace, whether it's cyber or other attacks that have been going on. They are unrelenting and they show an appetite to continue this, and we must fight it with everything that we have.
The talks at the EPC summit continued behind closed doors. What we can tell you is that the progress in the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia was widely welcomed. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev met with Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan at the sidelines of the summit before meeting the European Council President Antonio Costa and European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen. The two top European officials congratulated Aliyev on the progress made in the peace agenda between Armenia and Azerbaijan, while Aliyev noted that the two countries have already adapted to living in peace. The three also spoke on the role Azerbaijan plays in European energy security, as well as the development of the Middle Corridor, a trade route connecting China and Europe. The Azerbaijani president also met with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron for talks on bilateral relations. Aliyev met with Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky as well to discuss the humanitarian assistance Baku provided Kyiv, while energy cooperation was on the agenda of his meeting with Italy's Giorgia Meloni. The EPC summit followed Wednesday's informal meeting of the EU27, also here in the Danish capital, where European leaders talked on Ukraine and collective defense. Their discussions on a drone wall on the east of the continent and the possible use of frozen Russian assets as a zero-interest loan to Ukraine will be continued on October 23rd at the next European Council session. From Copenhagen for A News, Andy Mirch.
Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused Europe of blocking peace in Ukraine, saying Western leaders are driving the continent toward militarization. Speaking at the Valdai Discussion Club in Sochi, he said Moscow had no plans to attack NATO, dismissing the idea as impossible to believe. Putin framed the conflict as driven by Europe's actions rather than Moscow's choices. He warned Russia would not tolerate further pressure and said any threat to its security would draw a rapid response. With that, he turned to Europe's military build-up, pointing directly to Germany.
We simply cannot ignore what's happening. We have no right to do so for reasons of our own security. I repeat, our defense and security. Therefore, we are closely monitoring the escalating militarization of Europe. Is this just talk, or is it time for us to take countermeasures? We hear, and you know this, in Germany, for example, they say that the German army should once again be the most powerful in Europe. Well, fine, we're listening carefully, watching. What exactly is meant by that? I think no one doubts that Russia's response will not be long in coming. The response to these threats will be, to put it mildly, very convincing. It's precisely a response. We ourselves have never initiated a military confrontation.
NATO has strengthened its security to safeguard undersea infrastructure since a suspected sabotage in January this year in the Baltic Sea. The alliance now deploys air and naval patrols and warns that attacks will not go unpunished.
Of what we rely on for our daily lives lies under the sea, such as power lines, data cables and pipelines. These could be prone to suspected sabotage attacks, particularly in the North and Baltic Seas, according to NATO, which has increased its security in the area after a suspected sabotage attack in January and in previous years. These systems carry gas, electricity, more than $10 trillion in daily financial transactions, and 95% of global internet traffic, making them essential for energy supply, finance, communications, and trade. Damage to these networks could cut power, disrupt the internet, halt financial operations, and affect shipping, marking them as a high-priority target for protection. But this year, NATO has stepped up its surveillance with enhanced air and naval patrols. Ships that pass near key sites are monitored and questioned if suspicious, while pipelines and cables are checked using sonar, drones, and divers. This is not the first time such incidents have occurred. Previous damage has been reported in various locations, and similar operations were announced by NATO earlier this year. A new centre has been set up in Northwood in the UK, within NATO's Maritime Command, to protect critical undersea infrastructure, to facilitate operations, and to send forces to protect these critical systems. It's all managed by a special team at NATO headquarters in Brussels.
Russia's shadow fleet, ships that hide their identities or fly fake flags, has grown fast since 2022. NATO is responding with a new mission, Baltic Sentry, to safeguard undersea cables. And on the front line, Estonia has the green light to act against vessels that pose a danger.
NATO is boosting its defence in the Baltic and North Seas as Russia's shadow fleet grows, raising fears of spying, sabotage and threats to undersea cables. The number of these deceptive ships have surged from 200 in 2022 to nearly 1,000 today. On the front line, Estonia monitors dozens of such vessels daily in the Gulf of Finland, but admits it can do little to stop them. Russia is using grey zone tactics on an unprecedented scale, with around 1/5 of the world's tankers now classed as shadow ships. In response, NATO has launched a Baltic Sentry mission to safeguard undersea cables and pipelines, while the Estonian Navy is geared to confront civilian vessels that threaten its infrastructure. Analysts warn that shadow fleets will remain a global problem well beyond the Ukraine war, pointing to a broader issue of global maritime governance.
Over in Germany, it's 35 years ago that the country officially reunified after the world watched the Berlin Wall come down, marking the end of a division and the beginning of unity. The day is a reminder that a huge barricade once split the nation, dividing families and friends.
Every year on the 3rd of October, Germany marks Unity Day, the day when a divided nation officially became one. It is a moment to reflect on the country's history, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the reunification that reshaped Germany. To understand why this day is so important, we need to go back to the years after the Second World War. Imagine a city where neighbours, friends, even families woke up to find themselves cut in two by concrete and barbed wire. That was Berlin in 1961, and it is the story that makes German Unity Day. After the Second World War, Germany was divided into 4 zones, each controlled by one of the Allied powers: the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Berlin, though deep inside the Soviet zone, was also split into 4 sectors. By 1949, 2 new states had been created. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany, democratic and market-driven. In the East, the German Democratic Republic, a socialist state under Soviet influence. But the GDR had a problem. Its own people were leaving. Between 1949 and 1961, more than 2.5 million East Germans fled, many of them doctors, engineers, teachers and students. By the summer of 1961, thousands were crossing into West Berlin every single day. The brain drain threatened to collapse the East German economy. So, the authorities acted. On the night of 12th to 13th August 1961, East German forces rolled out barbed wire and blockades around West Berlin. Streets, rail lines, even family gardens were cut in two. In the weeks and months that followed, the makeshift barrier became a permanent one, a wall of concrete reinforced by electrified fences, watchtowers, guard dogs and landmines. By the 1980s, the Berlin Wall stretched 155 kilometers in total, 43 kilometers slicing through Berlin itself, and the rest circling the western half of the city. It was actually a system of fortifications, parallel walls, floodlights, the so-called death strip in between, and armed patrols under orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. And yet, thousands still risked it. Around 5,000 people made it across, through tunnels, in homemade balloons, even smuggled in cars. At least 140 lost their lives in the attempt, though some counts put the number closer to 190. Each escape and each death was a reminder of how far people would go for freedom. For 28 years, the wall stood as the concrete face of the Cold War. But by 1989, change was sweeping Eastern Europe. In East Germany, mass demonstrations demanded democracy. The Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, refused to send in tanks, unlike his predecessors. Then came 9th November 1989. At a press conference, an East German official, Günther Schabowski, stumbled over new travel rules, making it sound as though the borders were open immediately. That evening, thousands of East Berliners surged toward the checkpoints. Overwhelmed, confused guards stepped aside. The wall, the barrier that had defined a generation, was suddenly open. Crowds from both sides climbed the concrete, embraced, and began chipping away at it with hammers and chisels. Within days, pieces of the wall were being passed from hand to hand as souvenirs. Less than a year later, on the 3rd of October 1990, East and West Germany formally reunified. Since then, German Unity Day has been a national holiday. Each year, a different federal state hosts the official program of exhibitions, concerts and debates. The date chosen is important too. While the wall itself fell on the 9th of November 1989, that day also carries a darker memory. The Nazi pogrom against Jews in 1938, known as Kristallnacht. To avoid overshadowing that history, Germany instead marks reunification on the 3rd of October, the day the legal and political merger was complete. As Germany marks the 35th anniversary of its historic reunification, debates over lingering political and social divides continue, Yet the Berlin Wall remains a powerful symbol of the nation's journey toward unity and the challenges it has overcome.
Czechs are heading to the polls in parliamentary elections that could reshape the country's political landscape. The outcome will signal whether Czechia stays firmly aligned with the European Union and NATO or moves closer to Moscow.
In Prague and across the country, polling stations are open as Czechs choose all 200 members of the lower house of parliament. Voting runs through Saturday, with parties needing at least 5% of the vote to enter parliament under the proportional system. The front-runner is 71-year-old billionaire and former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš. His populist ANO party is campaigning on tax cuts, higher wages and calls to halt support for Ukraine. But despite leading the polls, ANO is unlikely to secure a majority, making coalition negotiations crucial. Prime Minister Peter Fiala's pro-Western Spolu coalition is calling for continued alignment with the European Union and NATO. The far-right SPD is pushing for a referendum on leaving the EU, while the far-left Stachilo movement opposes NATO and rejects military aid to Kiev. Opinion surveys put ANO at around 30 to 32%, Spolu at about 20%, with several smaller parties such as the Pirates, Stan and Motorists for themselves expected to play a decisive role in shaping the next government. Polling stations close on Saturday afternoon. Preliminary results are expected the same day, with near-complete figures later in the evening of October 4th. The outcome will decide whether Czechia remains firmly anchored in Brussels and NATO or takes a turn toward a more Moscow-friendly course.
Earlier, we were joined by Togrul Valikanlı in Baku, Azerbaijan, who said the EPC summit was largely focused on the war in Ukraine, European security, migration and economic issues, noting that leaders from outside the EU, including Azerbaijan, Georgia and Moldova, also took part, highlighting the platform's wider geopolitical reach. Let's see more.
From the statements of the European leaders and even a British Prime Minister, it's clear that 7th European Political Community Summit is mainly devoted to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the security of the security landscape of Europe, and alongside with migration affairs and economic development. To make parallel, the summit, which takes place in Copenhagen, Denmark, gains importance within the recent provocation on the Polish-Belarusian border and repeating incidents in the Baltic Sea. And so Europeans' defense, collective defense, or promoting the mechanisms for this issue and defense capabilities, supports to Kiev, funding tools are the topics of agenda for European leaders. Interestingly, that the summit brought together the leaders from the outside of the European Union, including Switzerland, Georgia, Moldova, Azerbaijan. As you know, for a long time, Russia used its fossil fuels, especially natural gas, as a diplomatic leverage. So for Europe, the South Caucasus region and even Central Asia are crucial in the frame of diversification of energy supplies policy, after which was implemented rapidly after the Russian military aggression against Ukraine, which was launched in 22. So to be realistic,
global condemnation is mounting after Thursday's Manchester synagogue attack that left 2 people dead and 3 others injured. Political leaders and community groups have voiced outrage and called for unity.
The attack on a synagogue in Manchester has sparked shock and anger at home and abroad on Thursday. Leaders are speaking out, denouncing the violence and expressing solidarity with the Jewish community. Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, emphasised that it is not a new hate.
We must be clear. It is a hatred that is rising once again, and Britain must defeat it once again. But to every Jewish person in this country, I also want to say this. I know how much fear you will be holding inside of you. I really do. And so, on behalf of our country, I express my solidarity, but also my sadness that you still have to live with these fears. Nobody should have to do that. Nobody.
The reaction was echoed in Copenhagen, Denmark, where the European Political Community Summit was taking place. French President Emmanuel Macron impressed support to both Britain and Jewish communities across Europe.
The terrorist attack in Manchester is once again proof that our Europe is a victim of this terrorist madness and of anti-Semitism. And I truly want to reiterate to Prime Minister Starmer and to the British people all our support also, to the Jewish community in Britain and across Europe.
Along with France, United Nations officials called the attack particularly heinous. Deputy UN spokesperson Farhan Haq delivered the Secretary-General's message.
The Secretary-General strongly condemns today's deadly terrorist attack on a synagogue in Manchester, in the United Kingdom. Houses of worship are sacred places where people can go to find peace. Targeting a synagogue on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, is particularly heinous. The Secretary-General extends his deepest condolences to the victims and their families and wishes a swift recovery to the injured.
As tributes continue to pour in, authorities are urging calm while investigations into the Manchester attack remain underway.
Israel is facing more international condemnation and global protests after its military intercepted almost all of about 40 boats in a flotilla carrying aid to Gaza. Officials say it's detained more than 450 foreign activists.
There were clashes in Sweden between pro-Palestinian demonstrators and police as hundreds protested on Thursday against Israel's decision to intercept and detain activists on a Gaza-bound flotilla carrying aid and medicine. The tensions led to numerous arrests. Demonstrations have erupted worldwide as thousands took their anger to the streets. It turned violent in Spain, where supporters of Palestinians and police came face to face in the capital, Madrid, when officers tried to disperse the crowds. Tensions also escalated in Barcelona, where international food chains were vandalized.
I'm hurt. I feel incredibly helpless. I feel anger and sick when I listen to people speaking on the TV or see Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at a summit saying that children in Palestine eat over 2,000 calories per day. How can they allow that man inside to say those things? The anger in our society has accumulated is here today.
In Italy, emotions also ran high as police used tear gas. Brazil protesters in Brasilia demanded the release of detained Brazilian activists who were on board one of the boats in the flotilla.
Regarding the detained Brazilians, the Foreign Ministry has taken a firm stance. But this is more than diplomacy. It's about genocide. I don't think diplomacy is enough anymore. We need a firmer measure, like breaking off relations. That's what we're asking for.
In Paris, demonstrators gathered in front of the Israeli embassy to show support for Gaza.
I came to demonstrate in front of the Israeli embassy to show our support for the people of Gaza and to demonstrate that the French people denounce the genocide currently being committed in Gaza by the Israeli army.
Governments also responded to Israel's actions. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has urged Israel to immediately repatriate the detained Mexican nationals. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa urged Israel to immediately release South Africans who were also on the flotilla, including former President Nelson Mandela's grandson, Nkosi Zwelivelile Mandela. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan criticized Israeli aggression, saying it showed Israel's government has no intention of letting hopes for peace grow. Israeli officials have repeatedly denounced the flotilla mission as a stunt. Israel says it's defending itself against charges of genocide in the International Court of Justice.
A Hamas official says the group will soon respond to President Donald Trump's peace proposal on Gaza. Trump presented a 20-point document calling for an immediate ceasefire and an exchange of captives held by Hamas with Palestinian political prisoners held by Israel. Hamas says discussions on the proposal are ongoing and that it will respond in a way that serves the interests of the Palestinian people. President Donald Trump says federal workers may face being fired and some government projects could be cut if the shutdown continues. In an interview with One America News, Trump pointed to a memo from the Office of Management and Budget suggesting cost-saving measures are being reviewed. He also said tariff revenues projected to reach $1 trillion a year could be used to help reduce the national debt and potentially fund rebate checks for Americans. The US federal debt now stands at $37.64 trillion, according to Treasury data.
Well, there could be firings, and that's their fault, and it could also be other things. I mean, we could cut projects that they wanted, favorite projects, and they'd be permanently cut. So you could say, a lot of people are saying Trump wanted this, that I wanted this closing, and I didn't want it. But a lot of people are saying it because I'm allowed to cut things that should have never been approved in the first place, and I will probably do.
Trump's comments come as frustration grows on Capitol Hill, where both sides are still not backing down and no agreement is in sight to end the shutdown. While some federal workers have been furloughed, others are working unpaid.
As the US government shutdown approached its third day, Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill continued to blame each other for failing to reach a funding agreement. In dueling press conferences on Thursday, both parties stood firm. House Speaker Mike Johnson rejected any negotiations involving added provisions, such as insurance subsidies in the funding bill.
They have made a decision that they would rather give taxpayer-funded benefits to illegal aliens than to keep the doors open for the American people, to keep vital services, veteran services, healthcare and nutrition for women, infants, and children. It is selfish. It is reprehensible, and it is exactly the opposite of what they have all said themselves in their own words very passionately every day until now.
A new vote is expected Friday afternoon as lawmakers attempt to break the impasse.
Chart that you're just using there.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said Democrats are open to negotiations, but only with credible partners.
We are ready, we are willing, we are able to sit down with anyone, anytime, any place, including the president and the vice president, to try to find a path forward, to reopen the government, enact a spending agreement that actually meets the needs of the American people, while at the same time addressing the Republican health care crisis.
Meanwhile, the shutdown is already affecting federal operations. Hundreds of thousands of government workers have either been furloughed or are working without pay. National landmarks such as museums and parks have closed, though some, such as the Statue of Liberty, remain open.
It has not affected me, just I don't work for the federal government, and a lot of the resources I use in DC, like the metro and stuff like that, that hasn't been stopped, so it hasn't affected me personally.
It just seems like a political battle to me, more so than something that's actually going to harm or get things done. So I'm ready for it to go back. We didn't come to Washington to have the things shut down, and we've had this scheduled for some time. So.
Well, we took a tour yesterday afternoon, and they did change it a little bit. It was the one about the Lincoln assassination, so we couldn't actually go in the Ford Theater, but it was okay. I mean, the tour guide was really excellent, and she just adapted it, so minimally, I would say.
Most people haven't felt much impact yet, but many worry things will get worse if the shutdown isn't resolved before the 15th of October, when the next paychecks are due.
The Philippines says it's completed its search and rescue operations following on powerful 6.9 magnitude earthquake, killing 73 and injuring more than 200 others. The decision was made as all missing persons had been accounted for and there were no further signs of trapped individuals, according to authorities. Efforts will now shift toward the distribution of relief, goods and post-disaster reconstruction. Access to most areas remains severely limited, with large vehicles unable to navigate the damaged roads, leaving motorcycles as primary means of transport. Turning to Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan's President Sadir Japarov has ordered lawmakers to bring back the death penalty for serious crimes against women and children. The move follows the murder of a teenage girl that has shocked the country. Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Kyrgyz President Sadir Japarov has instructed the government to draft a law that would reintroduce the death penalty. According to President spokesperson Askat Alagozov, the proposal concerns capital punishment for child rape, as well as for rape followed by the killing of women. He said the president believes that crimes against children and women in particular must not go unpunished. The move follows the killing of 17-year-old girl in Isykyl region. She disappeared after setting out to visit a friend, and days later her body was found in the Bum Gorge mountain pass in northern Kyrgyzstan. Investigators say a 41-year-old man from Bishkek picked her up in his car, drove her to an orchard, raped and then killed her. He has admitted to the crime and is being held in custody, and also authorities added that he had previous convictions for robbery and attempted murder. Officials said President Japarov has taken the investigation under his personal supervision. Kyrgyzstan has not carried out an execution since 1998. The death penalty was written out of the constitution in 2006 and replaced by life imprisonment a year later. An effort to revive it in 2023 stalled in parliament, and officials now emphasize that any new death sentence would only be enforced once all appeals have been exhausted. The debate comes against the backdrop of widespread concerns over women's safety. According to the Women, Peace and Security Index, Kyrgyzstan was ranked the most dangerous country for women in Central Asia in both 2021 and 2023. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Iran and Pakistan have agreed to exchange intelligence to combat drug trafficking networks, particularly across their shared border. The head of Iran's anti-narcotics police and his counterpart met in Islamabad to discuss bilateral cooperation.
Combating drug trafficking networks at the border between Iran and Pakistan has always been challenging, particularly because of the geographical location, according to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Iran also borders Afghanistan, the world's largest illicit opium producer. So Iran's eastern frontier has become a major transit path for illegal substances. Because of this challenge, Iran says it has built one of the strongest counter-narcotics enforcement capabilities in the region. Tehran says it has seized 74% of the world's opium and 25% of the world's heroin and morphine in 2012, according to the UN World Drug Report of 2014. And now, the Iranian and Pakistani anti-narcotics chiefs have agreed to enhance intelligence sharing to identify and fight drug trafficking networks and to boost border coordination. According to the IRNA news agency, Brigadier General Iraj Kakavand, head of Iran's anti-narcotics police, met the Major General Abdul Mueid, the ANF commander, during a visit to the force's headquarters in Islamabad on Tuesday. They both agreed to further information exchange to neutralize drug trafficking networks, take joint operational measures to combat cross-border drug trafficking, and overcome challenges to prevent drug smuggling. The meeting comes as Iran says it spends millions of dollars annually on border control, including for construction of expensive barriers along its border with Afghanistan and Pakistan. More than 3,700 Iranian law enforcement officials have been killed, and more than 12,000 have been maimed in counter-narcotics operations over the last 3 decades, according to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A News TV.
Now, Armenia's parliament has endorsed a US-brokered peace process with Azerbaijan in an emergency session. The statement reaffirms commitments signed in Washington on the 8th of August by the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan and the United States, including a framework peace treaty and recognition of borders. Lawmakers welcomed the Trump Road for International Peace and Prosperity initiative and urged both countries to avoid rhetoric that could fuel fresh tensions. In Tbilisi and across Georgia, voters head to the polls this Saturday to elect mayors and municipal councils. But the stakes are much higher than local governance. The public mood is deeply polarised, and the ruling Georgian Dream Party has framed the vote as a choice between independence and what it calls foreign interference. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili reports from Tbilisi.
In Tbilisi and across Georgia, voters will be choosing mayors and municipal councils this Saturday, but the stakes are much larger than City Hall, and the public mood is polarized. The ruling Georgian Dream Party has framed the election as a choice between independence and what it calls foreign interference. However, opposition parties and civic groups argue that Georgian Dream has hollowed out democracy, tightened control over the courts, the media and civil society, and is steering the country away from Europe and close to Moscow. Supporters of the government highlight stability and sovereignty, insisting that Georgian Dream has protected Georgia from outside meddling. Critics warned that the very essence of democracy is on the line, pointing to the shrinking space for dissent and the refusal to create conditions for fair competition. Meanwhile, abroad, the European Union and the United States have voiced concern over Georgia's democratic backsliding, and the Council of Europe is preparing a debate on the country's political crisis. And although the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe was formally invited, the invitation came only a month before the vote, too late to mount a meaningful observation mission. The results matter not only for Georgia, but also for the whole South Caucasus, a region where fragile security and shifting alliances make every political turn significant. The results will decide on whether Georgia remains on a European path or risks drifting into deeper isolation at a time when democracy, sovereignty and regional balance are all in play. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
And that's the news update from us in Baku this morning. Stay tuned to A News for more.